Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, November 13th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan, Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon, and White House Correspondent Phil Wegmann. So the shutdown is over for 2025. We may be doing this all again early next year, but at least last night, President Donald Trump did sign legislation to reopen the government. And he also talked a bit about what he would like to see happen with healthcare subsidies going forward. Here's what the president said last night.
So I want the money to go directly to you, the people. And you go out and you'll buy your own health insurance and you'll negotiate different plans and you'll get much better insurance and you will be an entrepreneur for yourself. So I'm always willing to work with anyone, including the other party. We'll work on something having to do with healthcare. We can do a lot better. We can do great. So much money is involved, and we're willing to pay so much money to the people. So we're going to pay a lot of money to the people. They're going to go out and buy their own health care, and we're going to forget this Obamacare madness. So with all of that, I just want to tell you the country has never been in better shape. We went through this short-term disaster with the Democrats because they thought it would be good politically, and it's an honor now to sign this incredible bill and get our country working again.
So, Phil, you were there. You were in the room. What was the mood, and what did you see that the rest of us missed?
Well, Speaker Johnson, who would be tasked with negotiating that reform that the president just laid out there, he didn't show his cards. That would be a very uphill battle. We'll see if Congress goes along with one of Donald Trump's favorite suggestions, which is giving money directly to the American people. But yeah, last night they brought reporters in to the Oval Office shortly after 10 o'clock. And yes, there was this triumph at a potentially fraught moment for the president of the United States. After 42 days, 22 hours, and 24 minutes, which is a palindrome for anyone following along at home, the shutdown finally ended. But it's fraught for two reasons. While Donald Trump has a lot of his friends there, members of Congress, different stakeholders, they're cheering him on. Over his right shoulder is Speaker Mike Johnson. And in the back of Trump's mind and also the speaker's mind is the fact that they know they're going to have to do this entire song and dance once again when the money runs out in January. And they know that they're going to do it as the Epstein shadow continues to grow over this administration. There was the discharge petition, which was successful yesterday. That is going to continue to be a controversy that haunts this president. But there in the moment, Donald Trump, he finally reopened the government. The lights turned on finally, and he promised that the White House was never again going to be held hostage. But that might be premature.
Yeah. Well, so Tom, this idea is to give this money, I guess, directly to enrollees. This is what Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, the senator, he's the chair of the Senate Health Committee, says about it. He says this, he says, quote, "We can keep on paying insurance companies to hide the cost of the health care behind confusing bills and rising premiums, or we can trust Americans with the tools to pay for the care directly at fair prices with total transparency." Gee, why didn't I think of that? What do you think of the plan, and what are the chances?
Listen, people have health savings accounts. This is not a new idea. There is, my old friend Foster Freeze, God rest his soul. One of his primary focuses for years was transparency and health costs. I mean, it is astonishing when you dig into it. And by the way, Rand Paul is a big proponent of that in the Senate. There is some support for that, and yeah, it sounds like a wonderful, dare I say, utopian atmosphere where you could go with cash and shop around for the best prices for the health care that you're looking for, and perhaps even negotiate rates and have those rates be public and fixed. Yeah, that would be great, as opposed to the system we have now, which even, Bernie Sanders, we've got the most expensive healthcare system in the world, and yet we don't necessarily have the best. We have a populace that isn't always the healthiest. I mean, we've got obesity and diabetes and yada, yada, yada. So But we're a long way from that, and it is a big lift to try and get through Congress. And Phil's right. This is classic Trump. This is what we're going to do. But the actual getting there and getting it done is going to be a very long and arduous process.
But at least it's a plan, Carl. I mean, at least the Republicans now are talking about something.
I don't know that it's really a plan, Andy. That's an interesting thing. The Democrats shut down this government, and they did it and they kept doing it because the polls were showing they weren't getting in trouble for it. The public wasn't blaming them. The majority of people were not blaming them. This strikes me as the same kind of thing. Trump's just trying to change the narrative. He's trying to change the polling a little bit. He's throwing an idea out there that casual people who don't follow healthcare policy, and that's most Americans closely, will say, "Oh, that sounds good." Tom mentioned those health savings accounts. This, President George W. Bush in his second term started the second term with an idea to partially privatize Social Security. Let people take some of the money they were putting, the plans varied, half of it or a fourth of it, and invest it on their own.
And what happened, Carl?
Well, it was a plan that polled very well. The idea of the plan, people liked it until they associated George W. Bush's name with it. Then all the Democrats said, we don't like that. So healthcare policy, like everything else, has become completely partisan. But I don't think, my point, Tom, I don't think Donald Trump really has a legislative agenda here. I think he's trying to change the narrative, trying to change the polling, trying to change the public perception. And this is an idea, if the Democrats don't go for it in January, then Trump will say, yeah, the Democrats don't want you to have money. They want the money to go to insurance companies. So it's a political gambit. I don't know how much of it's a serious policy proposal. Now, Senator Cassie's a serious person. Not only does he chair the committee, he's a physician, Andy, as you know. He has a way to do this, but I don't know that Trump is serious about waging a major legislative fight over it.
But even as a political matter, right? We were talking about what happened in the election on, in the economy and voters, their anxiety about inflation. Healthcare costs are one of those components that's out of control. And so here's Trump saying, his counter proposal to Dems who want to shove hundreds of billions of dollars to insurance companies, which again, this is one of those, in the aggregate, people are like, they don't like their insurance companies. They may like their doctors and their local coverage, but just as a broad category, people hate insurance companies. So that's a popular proposal, giving people money to insurance companies.
If my insurance company is listening, I love you guys.
Just much like the IRS when we talk about taxes.
Yeah. I love the IRS even more than I love my insurance companies.
But Phil, let me ask you this. Okay, you have 22 million Americans who are going to get walloped by these higher insurance bills, right? You've got 40 million people on the exchange, and their bills are going up too. Maybe not as much, but 40 million Americans will see higher insurance rates, which everyone sees every year anyway. And to Carl's point, is this now become sort of the new third rail of politics, in that what Trump is saying is he's going to shovel the money out the door. He's just going to shovel it into these health savings accounts as opposed to the insurance companies. But it's still money we don't have to subsidize people's health care.
This is Donald Trump finding a convenient boogeyman. He has arrived at a public enemy that both Republicans and Democrats don't like. Insurance companies. But no, this is not a plan. It's a suggestion. It's a shiny object that Donald Trump trot out there at the last minute. And the idea that Republicans are going to do any serious legislative heavy lifting 6 or 7 months before these guys have to get on the campaign trail, is pretty preposterous here. I mean, I was a little frustrated that we were talking about, this proposal as opposed to all of the knife fighting that happened before when it came to the government shutdown. But I shouldn't be, frustrated with any of you, because it's Donald Trump who sort of rolled this apple there. And now we're all chasing it. I think that, if this was going to be something the Republicans were going to do, then you would have seen them do a lot of planning beforehand. They would have strategized. They would have prepared. Instead, I think that Trump has caught Republicans off guard. And frankly, I am, suspicious that this isn't something that they want to do, because Speaker Mike Johnson, he told me previously that Obamacare was the biggest fumble, that Republicans were not prepared during the first season of Trump. Now they're not going to do a scramble drill to try and do it again, when they don't have any plan whatsoever.
Well, Andy, there's also an issue here, which is a lot of this money seems to be sort of disappearing, wasted, billions of dollars. There's this report, I think it was by Rand. We talked about it at the time. Something like 12 million people are signed up for the exchanges, getting the subsidy, but it never went to a doctor.
Right.
That was what the report said. Now we know that's not true. We know that 12 million Americans who are getting subsidy did not go to a doctor. The idea is that they used another insurance company. They signed up for the exchange, but they don't use it. They're getting the subsidy and they don't need it, or the insurance company is just signing them up and they don't know it. It's kind of a mystery. And I think one of the things that'll emerge from this discussion is, you like to use the phrase waste, fraud, and abuse, but how much of this money, what Trump's getting at is a fundamental thing. How much of this money is really going where it's needed? How much of it is actually going to making Americans, to treating sick people, to making them healthy? And in that context, I think we should maybe give the president a little credit. He's brought to the fore this issue of, is this the best way to do it? If you believe, as most Democrats do, that healthcare is a human right. Now, it's not in the Constitution, but that seems an evolving viewpoint among liberals, and I wouldn't argue with it. If you believe that, then the conversation shifts to, okay, then how do we, what role does government play in making sure that right is met, and how much money does it cost, and what are the delivery systems? So in that sense, we shouldn't just dismiss what Trump's saying, because these are the conversations we have to have.
Yeah.
Well, it's the language that he used there. I want everybody to be an entrepreneur, right? And so individual people understand what they need for their health care. And so Democrats are going to argue the opposite, that people are too stupid to be able to manage their own money. They're going to be, that you can't be trusted with this money because you don't know what healthcare you need. I mean,
They probably won't put it that way, Tom, but yeah.
Well, yeah, they probably won't, but they might, or they might see something that people will interpret that way, because that's what they're going to say. They're going to say the government knows better than you do, and we have to have all of these subsidies going to these insurance companies to provide this massive coverage for all these people. That'll resonate with some people, but I think Trump's argument will resonate with some people too, which is like, hey, just give me the money. I know what my family needs. I know how to spend that money most efficiently to provide healthcare for me and my family. That could be a potent argument.
Do you guys remember the piece that was in the Atlantic several years ago? And it was a guy who'd studied the healthcare system. He'd had a terrible family situation. He's a writer. I forget his name, and I apologize for that. But he said basically that we're doing this all wrong, is that people should pay for their own daily health care, the normal things, doctor's visits, vaccines, shots, checkups, and that all the money that's pooled should be for operations, catastrophic health care, and that there should be no barriers and everybody should get it, and that this would be a much more efficient system. And people say, well, people won't pay for preventive care. Well, people pay for their own car repairs. Most Americans actually do pay for preventive medicine and preventive things in their other lives, and that this would be another way of looking at it, and you just wouldn't have these horror stories.
Well, if you really wanted to reform the healthcare system, you would take healthcare insurance and take it out of the private employment process, which that's the craziest thing about the whole healthcare system, if you ask me. As someone who, Tom knows, if you employ people, you're paying this health insurance. It's crazy, right?
And I love my RealClearPolitics.
Yes, right. But it really,
throw that in there.
It's if you think of all the other things I used to tell my employees, I said, look, I don't pay for your kids' college education. I don't pay for your I do pay your part of your Social Security taxes, but I don't pay your car insurance. Why am I paying your health insurance? But that's a topic for another day. But
yes,
Phil, you mentioned that we may be doing this all again in January. Do you think that's going to happen? Or do you think, Trump wants that filibuster repealed? He talked about that last night as well, didn't he?
He was right there giving his final parting shot for why Republicans should go along with filibuster reform, getting rid of it. Democrats would love to see Republicans snatch that defeat from the jaws of victory here. I think that's a question not so much for the White House or congressional Republicans, but for Democrats. Do they have the appetite to fight with Minority Leader Schumer to do this all over again? And can they change the minds of those 8 Democrats who said, look, it is not worth having members of the military go without paychecks, mothers and families on food assistance go hungry, and planes be delayed for a messaging victory. And again, like just going back to the very beginning, Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, he offered Democrats a deal 3 weeks ago, a vote on a messaging healthcare bill, a standalone bill that wasn't going to go anywhere, in exchange for turning the lights back on. They said no. And then a couple of weeks later, that's exactly the deal that they got.
Mm. So no appetite, you think, on the Democrat side for another shutdown? I mean, I would think with the midterms around the corner that that's just not something that they're going to have.
I mean, wouldn't it seem weird if these 8 senators who did
Right.
this, like in 6 weeks, are like, no, we're going to go back to shutting down the government. I mean, it just seems like they're locked in now. I unless something changes, unless they don't get their vote, perhaps, and they feel like they were double crossed, maybe. But if they get their vote, why would they suddenly revert back to, holding the government hostage and not voting to keep it open? It doesn't make any sense to me.
That said, there is going to be an incentive for Democrats to get a much better deal in January. They're not just going to go along with another clean CR. They're going to try and get some of their priorities into the final product, knowing that Republicans don't want to do this again.
What?
We'll see if it's something on the
ACA
margins.
subsidies?
I think the ACA subsidies were obviously a huge swing. They were basically pulling a Ted Cruz, trying to do what he did in 2013, but in reverse. They did get a victory here where they were able to have the furloughed employees reemployed and get their back pay. Maybe it's something small like that, but I don't think that it will be a clean product.
Phil, let me ask you a question. You cover the White House. Why doesn't President Trump he says these things in the Oval Office, and we're so siloed now. I think if you watch Fox News, you see that. You read Real Clear Politics, you may see it, C-SPAN. But, the Washington Post, they don't give, these networks don't give wide berth. They don't give him wide coverage. Why doesn't he hold, give a primetime speech and lay it out and say, between, maybe if they do this again in January, and I don't know why he didn't do it this time, and say, listen, the Democrats are saying that I'm shutting the government down, but they know they're shutting the government down. They've told us this privately. They're bragging about it to their own donors. They've done this. Here's what they say. Here's why they're wrong. Here's why I want to keep the government over. Just give a speech just sort of laying out the case. You would have people, independent voters and Democrats, who never really hear Trump's voice, and you would open their eyes because they're not really getting a complete picture from our friends in the Fourth Estate. Why don't he do that?
Well, just very quickly, this is a president who's very accessible, but he does not have the traditional press conference. He brings the press in for these small gaggles where there's only a handful of reporters. My humble suggestion, and showing my clear bias, is that yes, the president of the United States should have a press conference. And of course, they should slot in time for at least 3 or 4 questions from Real Clear Politics.
Excellent. Well, on that sage advice from Phil Wegmann, we're going to take a break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been here with Tom Bevan, Phil Wegmann, and Carl Cannon, and we'll be back with more right after these words. Guys, newsrooms across the country were inundated with Epstein emails. Yesterday, the New York Times say they even used AI to help sort through them. And this is all because the House Democrats released some emails yesterday morning, and then the House Republicans released even more. And it looks like we are going to have a House vote next week on releasing the Epstein files. Here's California Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Don Bacon of Nebraska on how they see the upcoming vote.
I do think that you could get 30, 40, 50 Republicans voting for it, because what are we talking about? We're talking about rich and powerful men who abused young girls and told people in junior high to go recruit others to be raped or abused. That's what we're talking about. And so I think when it's actually a vote on the House floor, do you want these files released? Republicans and Democrats are going to vote yes.
Just to be clear, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You will be voting yes on releasing the Epstein files if it makes it to the floor, and you believe it will.
If it goes on the floor, I get a lot of pushback. Why don't you put your name on the discharge petition? And I'm just going to be subtle in my response. Just look at all the few Republicans that are on it and who they are. It's going to come on the floor. I will vote yes.
So, Carl, are you at least now a little bit interested in seeing what's in these files? And what have we learned, if anything, that we didn't know before?
Hold on. We gotta start by giving Carl props from yesterday's show when we were talking about these emails. And Carl was the one who was very skeptical of the way the Democrats released this and blacked out the name of the victim and just wrote victim in there. His antenna went up, and rightfully so, Carl. Good job.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That woman, she died earlier this year. She was a victim. She was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and her life was ruined by what they did to her. But she was not a victim of Donald Trump's, which is what the Democrats implied. It wasn't just that they redacted her name. It was dishonest. It was cynical. It was a dirty trick almost, and most of the media went for it. Because she's quoted in the email. Jeffrey Epstein is writing Ghislaine Maxwell that this woman, Virginia was her name, had spent hours at his house with Donald Trump. But she was asked that in a deposition, and she said she'd never been alone in that house with Donald Trump. Moreover, she praised Trump till the day she died. She loved Trump, and her biographer, her ghostwriter who finished the book, has admitted this in interviews. And she said that Trump was always a gentleman to her. So this was dishonest and really despicable. And you're going to accuse somebody of this. You should be careful, because then it hurts the real victims of child sex abuse. It hurts it hurts rape victims. It hurts anybody who brings a charge. What the Democrats have done, have used this for political and partisan advantage to tarnish Trump's name. And I don't usually defend Trump on this show, but this is behavior that should be beyond the pale. And the things that they've been saying about Trump that in the Nation and New York Times, that this proves that he knew what they were up to, doesn't prove that at all. It may be true that he knew what Ghislaine Maxwell, but he says he asked her to stop. Ghislaine Maxwell, what she was doing was recruiting young women who worked at Mar-a-Lago to leave and go work for them. And he doesn't mean he knew that he was actually molesting them. So this whole thing, and you play that clip, Andy, from Ro Khanna. He gave away the game. He said, "Yeah, we get this vote. It's the beginning of Donald Trump being a lame duck." So this is all aimed at Trump. It's all partisan. These Democrats don't care at all about the victims, and they don't care about Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell either. They just care about hurting Trump. And I think that's wrong, and I think they should be called out on it. And yeah, my antenna went up yesterday when I saw that weird redaction.
But can't, Tom, two things be true? One, that Donald Trump may be completely innocent. But the other thing is, why not see the files? Why is the White House going to such extent, after campaigning on the idea of releasing them, to hold them so close? And it really is an extraordinary effort to the point where they're sort of the Justice Department is sort of strong arming Republican Congress representatives in order to keep them from voting for the release. That does raise a question, does it not?
Yes, it does. And I think that's been the conundrum that Trump has found himself in on this issue the entire time, because as we talked about yesterday, I mean, he campaigned, his surrogates campaigned on this, talking about when they got in, they'd release all the files. And then when they got in, Pam Bondi orchestrated this ridiculous thing at the White House where they had all these influencers come over and gave them these binders that basically didn't have any new information, and tried to pass that off as some sort of, model of transparency. And then she said she had the list on her desk, but then she said, no, that wasn't it. There's just no list. So it's been sort of a comedy of errors as Trump has tried to, work his way through this issue. And you're right. I mean, so I think, as I said yesterday, I'm all for transparency, but I also agree with Carl. Democrats are just so cynical on this they, you know, they disgrace themselves by, doing this little bait and switch with Virginia Jeffrey and trying to make it seem like, and by the way, they got the headlines they wanted, as Carl mentioned, every single newspaper. They all, painted it as if Trump knew and Trump was, guilty of something. But Democrats don't, they were in charge for 4 years. They did nothing on this issue. Their only interest in this is that they see it as a wedge that they can drive between Trump and his base, and they see it as an issue that they can use to tarnish him and bring him down and disgrace him further. And obviously, they've tried to impeach him. Folks have tried to kill him. None of that stuff has worked, and they think the Jeffrey Epstein files might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak. But yeah, so I get both sides of that argument, Andy. I would like to see the files, but at the same time, the way the Democrats have handled this has just been, quite frankly, disgraceful.
Yeah. But Carl.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Speaker Johnson has said he's going to have a vote next week on this.
Yeah.
Moved the schedule up to do that. Mm-hmm. And Ro Khanna says that there's 50 to 60 Republicans he thinks that will vote for this as well. So just to the point of, maybe that's a high number, maybe it's a low number, but it's probably going to pass with a fair amount of Republican support. So even if, to Tom's point that the Democrats, and your point that the Democrats have been cynical about this, there does seem to be bipartisan support, at least in the House, to get these things released. And that's in part because the rank and file, you look at every poll, people want to see what's in these files.
Well, I don't know how much ordinary Americans really care about this issue, but when asked, they say what you just said, Andy. And I would say the same thing. The taxpayers paid for that investigation. Jeffrey Epstein shortchanged it by killing himself in prison or getting himself murdered. As I pointed out yesterday, I wasn't there, but let's just say it was a suicide. That's the official version. Ghislaine Maxwell's in prison. But if there's a sense in the country that powerful people are being protected by the government, and that Jeffrey Epstein's death saved them from being embarrassed, that's a pretty human instinct to want to know what's in those files. As a reporter, I share that view. Yeah, and it's funny, Andy. I was young. I covered Congress when I was a young reporter in Washington, and you sometimes wonder, how would I vote on this issue? And that Nebraska Republican congressman, that's exactly what I would have done. I would not have signed the petition, but if it came to a vote, I'd certainly vote for it. Yeah, all right, let's see what's in there. There's going to be people hurt who are innocent. But back to what I was saying before, what Trump has said, Trump hasn't explained himself very clearly on this, and so it's hard to know what he thinks. But what he has said is that the Democrats it's a hoax. The Democrats are just using this to hurt people. They proved yesterday that Trump's right about that. What they did yesterday proves Trump's point. Because before I couldn't understand it. I thought, if he's nothing to hide, why does he care? Well, because it doesn't matter, even if he has nothing to hide. These snippets of information will be used against him, and it turns out that, this reporter, Michael, well, he's not really a journalist, Michael Wolff, who wrote these anti-Trump books, in some of the emails, he's like advising Jeffrey Epstein on how basically to extort Trump or gain favor with Trump or to use leverage against Trump. That's not what journalists should be doing. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to come out.
Is that in the handbook, Carl? The Journalism 101 handbook?
First thing they tell you, Tom, in J school, don't try and, collaborate with child molesters to extort public people. Yeah. I remember it. I was shocked. And so there's going to be all these kind of things that come out. But what Trump is saying is the Democrats will misuse it and they'll lie about it. Well, that's already happened. They did that yesterday. So, but look, to your point, guys, I mean, I tried to ignore this story and poo-poo it, and I got nowhere with that. but now
can't meet him, join him.
Exactly.
Well, Laura Loomer said this. I thought that was interesting. She said,
"It's a sage observer."
Well, I just, okay. I'm just to tell you what she said, and then you can respond. Don't shoot the messenger here. She said, I don't think that it's consuming his presidency because he's guilty. I think she means because he's not guilty. But I think that the Epstein file is the next Russian collusion hoax. Tom, is she right?
I don't know about that. I mean, again, let's take Carl's point, right? Democrats are going to use this information by hook or by crook to try and slime Trump with it. Okay. So that part of it is true. And in that sense, they're going to be as manipulative and deceptive as, like, they really don't care what they have to do, what shortcuts, what, dirty tricks, whatever. I believe that to be 100% true. On the other hand, is it a complete hoax made up out of nothing? Trump was originally trying to, oh, this is Biden's DOJ, like they faked all these files and stuff. Like, is that true? I don't think that's true. I mean, these files have been around for a long time. They predate the Biden administration. We know Donald Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. We know his name is in those files. In what capacity, we don't know. But the idea that his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein was some sort of, hoax that's made up out of whole cloth or something, it's some Democratic talking point, the way that they basically said he was a Russian agent. No, it's not the same. Those are not that's not an apples to apples comparison. So,
Tom, could it all be about that lewd birthday card? Is that what this is all about, to protect that from coming out?
It's already out.
It's already
so
out.
what's the point?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
unless there's,
yeah.
and this is the problem with the effort by the Trump administration and Trump himself to wave it away. And, oh, this is, we're talking about this guy, he's dead, and these are 15 years old. It makes him look like he has something to hide. It makes people think, wow, maybe there really is, like, he's going out of his way to do this. There must be something that's in there that's damaging or damning, and maybe there is. I don't know, but he's not helping himself by, if there's nothing in there, if it's merely like the birthday card or something similar, he'd be better off to just let it come out and move on, because his base is not going to abandon him on this. I don't think, especially if it's not, if it's mild, or it's kind of something that we already know about. But he's not acting like that, and that I don't know why that is.
Yeah. Well, Carl, just the politics of this for a minute. It seems to me that what the Democrats are doing is not just trying to embarrass Trump or whatever, but it's also to drive that wedge between him and fellow Republicans. And
Sure.
that's the thing, that's why you get the House vote. That's why you get it to the Senate, and the Senate has to vote on it. And that means that senators have to stand up or not stand up to Donald Trump. Now, my understanding is that if this actually goes through the Senate, then Trump could veto it, and that's sort of the end of it. But again, forcing the Republicans to take those votes puts them in an uncomfortable position.
I agree with you completely. And this is also a very unusual thing. It's a discharged petition, right? So members of Congress who have signed it cannot take their names off of it. They're stuck with that. So, you can change your vote. I've covered dramatic hearings where they're got these close votes, and people are running down the aisles and people grabbing them, and they literally change their vote. You can't change your vote. So Mike Johnson's acceded to that. He's going to have a vote. I don't have any idea what the Senate's going to do on this, but so then it would be a law. What's the law? The law is you have to release this. It's a very unusual thing. My guess is that at some point, if you look at the way it's going, the administration is just going to have to realize that this is a losing issue, that for the reasons Tom pointed out, ordinary Americans, even people who voted for Trump, are say, wait a minute, okay, he's going to all these lengths that you describe, Andy. All right, what's he hiding? And at some point, I don't know, and I myself wonder, what is he hiding? And at some point, unless it's felonious behavior or whatever it is, Trump's going to, I think, come to the conclusion that the damage is already being done. It's going to be worse. It's going to be worse if he doesn't let it out. Have conspiracy theories from now for 50 years.
And just imagine the ads that Democrats will run against these Republicans. Rep. Jones voted to protect a pedophile.
Exactly.
And sided with Donald Trump and protected a pedophile. I mean,
that's right.
That they're absolutely going to try and do that.
And Andy, you point out that he was friends with Donald Trump. Jeffrey, he was also friends with Bill Clinton. He was friends with Prince Andrew. The man who formerly known as Prince Andrew,
right?
I mean, he had all these people that he knew, and remember, the original client list wasn't the idea wasn't that Jeffrey Epstein had like a black book, like a madam or a pimp of people he'd, you know, gotten underage women for. The idea was his client list initially, when that phrase came up, was people he'd advised. He was a financial advisor. They were his clients who he advised. You're not going to even want to be on that list, by the
Yeah.
time this comes out.
No, I don't think that there's any good association for any of those people. However, I think that when you put these things sort of and you weigh them out, a few people, maybe many people, are going to be embarrassed. But it also may mean that there are a few really bad apples will be exposed, and I think that's what the American people would like to see. I just think that the
Yeah,
sunshine.
we should make it clear on this show that none of the three of us ever once met Jeffrey Epstein. I want that on the record.
Well, we privately, there's been some speculation why Carl was so disinterested.
Never met him.
This list.
I even heard of him till this. That Miami Herald reporter, she broke this story. She deserves a lot of credit because he'd gotten caught in Palm Beach. And if the authorities there had done their job, this wouldn't, and prosecute this case properly, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah.
But they gave him this sweetheart deal where he didn't even really have to spend nights in jail. He kept doing his stuff that he was doing.
Right.
And she broke the story. And it shows you, we're talking about journalists not doing their job. Well, here's a journalist who did her job, and she brought this to light. And because she did so, one can only say prevented more victims more people from being victimized, more young women.
All right. Well, good. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after this. Tom, these HB1 or H1B, I can never keep it straight. These visas, Donald Trump was talking about them the other night with Laura Ingraham, and it seems to be that MAGA is kind of upset with him on this.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Laura Ingraham's interview with Trump a couple of days ago. Well, they released a second part, and in that second part, she talked about the H-1B visas and about the Chinese students, and Trump basically argued that, American workers don't have the capacity, they don't have the knowledge to do what needs to be done, and so we need to import these folks. And that is that he faced a lot of backlash for it, and actually J.D. Vance had said something almost the exact opposite and said, look, we can't be giving jobs to people from foreign lands when we've got people here who have the abilities and the skills, and we need to give them the skills to do these jobs. And so it was just an interesting moment that, we just spent 15 minutes talking about the Epstein files, and that's one of the issues that has divided sort of the MAGA base a little bit, but it's not really a policy. This is a policy that, you remember when Trump first said we were going to have 500,000 Chinese students, we needed them and we were going to allow them in. He had a conversation with President Xi, and if you were living online at all and in tune with any of the sort of right-wing influencers, I mean, they went crazy. Yeah. And so this is a debate, ongoing debate, where Trump finds himself, one of the few issues where he finds himself on the wrong side of a majority of MAGA voters. And he continues to sort of double down on it. And, some would say he's sort of tone deaf to how big of an issue this is for his supporters. But I think J.D. Vance is actually got his finger on the pulse of where the MAGA movement is on this.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, hey, you know what? We have Chris Matthews with us here.
My old buddy.
He's a presidential speechwriter, top aide Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill, and he's the host of Hardball on Substack. And he's the author of a new book I want to talk to him about. It's called Lessons from Bobby, 10 Reasons Robert F. Kennedy Still Matters. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's
the
100th anniversary of Bobby Kennedy the next week. He was born in 1925, and here we are in 2025, and we're going to talk about Bobby.
Yeah. So you've written a couple books on the Kennedys. So what makes this one different, and why'd you write it now? I mean, I guess for the centennial. Is that why?
I got called up by Simon & Schuster. They said, write a book about Bobby for the centennial, and I did it. And I dug up a lot of reality here. I mean, if you think about this, is just reality. If you look at a football game, college football games, look at the SEC, the Southern Conference, and you look at the African-American players. Think about those schools that have all been integrated. Bobby Kennedy did that. James Meredith was the guy he got into Ole Miss, Mississippi. He broke the door down past George Wallace at University of Alabama. All that integration went on, racial integration, if you will, all because of Bobby. He obeyed the Supreme Court rulings. He didn't come up with stuff on his own or listen to the president or anything. He did what the court was telling him to do, and he believed in it.
Well, Chris, this is Carl Cannon. So Bobby Kennedy, so he gets to be Attorney General because his brother's the president. Tom Bevan was going to ask you this. It's a tough question, but I'll ask it. I'll ask it instead. No, in no way qualified to be vice president, to be Attorney General, except that he has the confidence of his brother, that Jack Kennedy trusts him implicitly.
And he joked about it with the young lawyers at the Justice Department. He said, I got a job with the Justice Department back in the early 50s, and I worked my way up and did all the jobs and took the cases. And then my brother got elected president. So that's why I'm Attorney General at 35. And right. I'll tell you, the Justice Department building has been named after Robert Kennedy because of what he did with all the desegregation work he did, with pushing for civil rights. He was the one who pushed his brother to go on television in 1963 and call for civil rights and say it was as old as the Bible and as true as the American Constitution. He did all that. And, I think about him as an historian. I think about he's the guy that really got us through the Cuban Missile Crisis to avoid a nuclear war. He would say, we better make a deal here with the Russians, over the Turkish missiles and the missiles in Italy. We have to make a deal secretly to get us through this situation, and they did it. And, Bobby started out as a dove. I started actually as a hawk in Vietnam, and he said, I was wrong about the Vietnam War. I was wrong. He was very good about that. He said, before I was Attorney General, I didn't care about black opportunity or civil rights, but now I do because I've seen the situation and how tough it is, and I'm for the people and their rights.
Tom, go ahead, because I'll jump in, but I don't want to monopolize it. And I took the question already.
So, Chris, my question on this is on your book. You start. So it's 10 lessons from Bobby Kennedy. And lesson number 1 is heal the divide. And you start the book by saying, look, America is divided and we need someone like Bobby Kennedy who can bring folks together. At the end of the book, the last sentence in the book is that we need some of Bobby Kennedy's spirit and, yes, also some of his rage. So help me understand why that's not contradictory. How can someone help heal the country by having rage against people who disagree with them politically, like half the country these days? How's that going to work, and who could do that?
Well, it's a remarkable question, and that's why I think he's interesting. When he died, he was killed by Sirhan, and the train that carried his body from St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, where they had the mass, down to Arlington Cemetery, where his brother was already buried, who was also assassinated. The crowds along that train route were unique. In Philadelphia, where I grew up, 20,000 African Americans sang spontaneously the Battle Hymn of the Republic. In the spaces along that track, if you know that route, most people who live on the East do know that route. There are a lot of white working class people that live near the train tracks. And one thing is, if you live close enough within walking distance of train tracks, you're poor, white or black. And they were out there saluting like enlisted men. They were all, as one guy with his family in birth order, all saluting Bobby Kennedy. So there was a real unity about him. I think he made a real effort. For example, when he campaigned in Gary, Indiana, he would put Tony Zale, the former middleweight champ, on one side of him, and Richard Hatcher, the first black mayor, on the other side, in an open car. He really made an effort to bring people together. And I think he's also a unique person, a tough liberal. We don't have many tough liberals. He believed in law and order. He believed in cops. He loved cops, as Frank Mankiewicz told me. He loved cops. But he was also for poor people, minority people who have trouble with the police. I mean, he believed in law and order. In fact, he used the phrase law and order. Imagine that, a liberal saying, I want law and order in this country. And when there was burning of the Capitol after Dr. King was killed, Kerry Kennedy, his daughter, told me his father was so upset about all the blacks burning down the city of Washington. He said, this is not doing anybody any good. This is wrong. So get a tough liberal out there who's for law and order and love that phrase and used it. And also is for people who haven't had such breaks in life. So it's doable.
Yeah.
But you got to
All
be
right, you're
cops.
listening.
I'm sorry, in the end, everybody on the left, most people have said, we need cops. You just do in tough neighborhoods. You just do. And I'm sorry, that's the real world. But most people who live in the real world accept that.
You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We're talking to Chris Matthews about his new book. And, Chris, you say at one point, you asked the question, what would Robert F. Kennedy make of Donald Trump? And I have to ask you in the same spirit, what would RFK make of his own son, RFK Jr., being in Trump's cabinet?
Okay, you're being cruel here. Okay, this is what I don't want to get into, but I'll tell you this. What I did. I dug up when his dad was shot and killed. He was at the Good Samaritan Hospital out in L.A., and he's crying. He was a 14-year-old kid being a 14-year-old kid, and your dad gets killed tragically right after winning the California primary and maybe becoming president someday. And your father's been shot dead because he's reaching for the hand of a $75 a week dishwasher, a Mexican-American guy. And he lived his life like an elite, and the kid lived his life like an elite. Look, I knew Bobby Kennedy before he was this anti-vaccination character. I don't understand it. I know he was very good on the environment. I was down there in Mexico with him, Baja California, fighting the Japanese in some desalinization camp that was killing the whales and everything. I saw him under different circumstances. I called him up after I finished writing this book, Lessons from Bobby, and I said, I wrote a book about your dad. It's very positive. I don't mention you. So, I do agree with every question that's on your lips. I know the questions. I don't understand it. I understand the family doesn't like what's going on with him. But the memory of Bobby's going to be returned. I am going to do what I can to remind people of who RFK is. And it's the guy who stood for regular people, white and black and Hispanic. And he really did take some chances with crowds. He once said that when people grabbed, they were grabbing his shoes. I don't know how you grab shoes off a politician, but they would take his cufflinks, his shoes, everything. They were so physically connected to him. You wonder, why do you ride around in an open car in today's craziness of politics? And he said that's the only way you can connect with people. They have to feel you and touch you. Boy, that's a sad case about America today and our security problems.
Andy, when I came to Washington, I worked for the San Jose Mercury News, and Chris was a columnist for the San Francisco Examiner. We ran into each other a little bit, and it was the paper, Chronicle and merged. San Francisco Chronicle and the Examiner had merged. And Chris, I don't know if you know this story, but I delivered the Chronicle in Sacramento. I had a paper out delivered on my bike, and I remember the day Bobby was killed. And my mother woke me up, and she said, you got to get out there early, and you got to deliver these papers. And people didn't even, it wasn't in the news that he died because it was a late, the Bulldog edition. And I had to tell people, my mom gave me this card to read to people, and about half the houses, women, usually a woman of the house, was out there in the cold morning saying, is Bobby going to live? And I said, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
So I know it was the saddest day of my life. And I realized then, it's what you're saying about the funeral, Chris.
Chris, I want to thank you for being here. And I'm afraid Carl got the last word. Sometimes happens on this program. But that is our program for today. If you're listening on the podcast apps or watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, like, and send us a comment. I do read them, and it's great to hear from you. If you're listening on the Megyn Kelly channel on Sirius XM, we'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Stick around because Megyn is coming up right after this. I'm Andrew Walworth on behalf of Carl, Tom, everyone here at RCP, and Chris Matthews today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow.